A very good evening to everyone in attendance today. The International Council for Circular Economy welcomes you to the sixth episode of the third season of our Circular Chat, focused on the biggest issue we as a global community face today: climate change. The Circular Chat is an initiative by ICCE to develop and promote the idea of a circular economy. The chats aim to engage key actors to mobilize system solutions at scale, and in that regard, we wish to bring to you the opinions and immense knowledge of leading experts in the field of climate change and the various facets it covers. My name is Anagha, and it's my honor to introduce our guest speaker for the day, Dr. Sweety Pandey, on the topic Climate Finance. How does it work? As a trained economist with a doctorate in environmental economics, Dr. Pandey has worked in Niti Aayog as YP in the energy team. Leveraging her passion for research and writing, she aspires to contribute measurably in building India's capacity and scholarship in climate and environmental economics. Apart from several publications in global journals, she was the lead of the State Energy and Climate Index projects in Niti Aayog. Dr. Pandey also had an opportunity to contribute to the COP26 strategy project in Niti Aayog and the Sustainable Finance Framework Committee of the Finance Ministry. It is wonderful to have you with us today, Dr. Pandey.
Thank you so much, Ms. Anaga, for inviting me to this chat show. I'm glad that I've been invited here, and I wish I'll be helpful and I wish I'll be able to contribute to this chat show. Thank you so much.
Ma'am, it's an honor to have you with us today. So, well, to begin, the term climate finance itself might be a somewhat unfamiliar and vague term for a few of our viewers. So, before we dive, quite deep into the topic, could you please maybe give us a short explanation of the same?
Yeah, Anaka, basically, I think like before understanding climate finance, we need to understand a little bit more about the climate change. And as we all know that climate change is affecting our planet from pole to pole. So one of the institute, National Ocean and Atmospheric Administration, it is an international agency, and it monitors global climate data. It stated that the global temperature rose about 1 degree Celsius from 1901 to 2020. And apart from this global rise in temperature, there are other factors such as rising sea levels, and the glaciers are shrinking, and the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has also risen by 25% since 1958 and by about 40% since industrializations. So all these things, all these factors are adversely affecting the things that we depend upon and the things which we value. It is affecting our water system, energy, transportation, agriculture, and the entire ecosystem. And to prevent the acceleration of these adverse effects, as mentioned above, it requires huge amounts of capital, and these capital investment were traditionally not were traditionally might not be the profitable investment. In addition, adapting to the adverse changes that the climate change has already inflicted or inflicting upon our ecosystems also requires humongous capital. So, if we go by the definition given by UNFCCC, what do you mean by climate finance? Climate finance, as per UNFCCC definition, refers to local, national, or transnational financing drawn from public, private, and alternative sources of financing that seeks to support prevention and adaptation actions that will address climate change. If you go in simple words, we can say that climate finance refers to investments that support significant reduction in GHG emission and help us to adapt current and future impacts of climate change. I think this makes it clear if what is climate change and what do we mean by climate finance. In addition to that, I would like to add few things. Exactly what climate finance, what are the activities in which climate finance is useful? In energy efficiency, in climate change mitigation, in climate change resilience projects, and conservation of biodiversity, a lot of huge amount of climate finance is available and it is used in developed as well as developing countries. Thank you, Anaga.
Yes, ma'am. Now that you have mentioned that climate finance is used for all of these extremely big projects that could affect our climate and us our chance to bring down carbon emissions and the temperature of the atmosphere. It is understood that there exists some financial mechanisms to help facilitate developing nations in particular in their endeavor against climate change, right? So maybe could you shed some light about that particular area of climate finance?
Yes, Anaga. Uh, as we know, to facilitate the provision of climate finance, the UNFCCC convention established a financial mechanism with an aim to provide financial resources to developing countries. And this financial mechanism is also serves to the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. So we need to know about one or more existing international entities which we have. So first one is Global Environment Facility. It came into force in 1994 and it has served as an operating entity of the financial mechanism since the convention. And secondly, we have at COP16 in 2010, parties established the Green Climate Fund. You must be knowing, and it has been designated as an operating entity of the financial mechanism. So if we, apart from these two, like Global Environment Facility, which is also known as GEF, and the GCF, Global Green Climate Fund, we have like they have also established two special funds. The first one is Special Climate Change Fund, and the second one is Least Developed Countries Fund. And both of these funds are managed by both GCF and the Adaptation Fund. Now, I have not explained earlier what is Adaptation Fund. So, Adaptation Fund was established under the Kyoto Protocol in 2001, and this fund was established with an aim to finance concrete adaptation projects and programs in developing countries. And all these financial mechanisms are helping developing countries in building projects and adapting to climate change. Apart from these few things, there is another thing which we should know, that is Standing Committee on Finance. At COP16 in 2010, parties decided to establish a standing committee on finance to assist the COP in exercising its functions in relation to the financial mechanism of the convention. I can give you few examples for India, especially if, for example, for India, the indicative allocation for GEF cycle, GEF seventh cycle, and the seventh cycle is for the period July 2018 to June 2022. The indicative allocative fund was US dollar 47.24 million for climate change focal area. And similarly, in 2015-16, India has accessed 6.6 million USD from adaptation fund for 5 projects, and most of these projects were related to ecological security and building adaptive capacities. So these are the financial mechanism, and I have given you some data also to see how it is helping the developing countries. And if someone wants to explore more about how these funds and how these mechanism is working in each and every developing countries, anyone can visit the UNFCC website, and it has a climate finance data portal which specifically provides information on activities funded in developing countries to implement various climate action projects. Thank you, Anaga.
Yes, ma'am. Like you mentioned, all the climate finance, that we continue to do, it is to ensure that developing nations are also able to contribute, their part of it to the long-term climate goals that the world has set for itself, right? But for them, it is important to make sure that financial flows that occur are consistent with low emission, climate resilient pathways. So, in that regard, are there any exceptional steps that the world community has already taken? And if not, do you think that you have any recommendations that could make sure that we can achieve this possibility?
Yes, Anaka. If you want to understand this question, we need to first look at one of the significant guiding principles for climate finance. If we see Article 2.1 of Paris Agreement, it has 3 clauses. Article 2.1a, it emphasizes on limiting the global average temperature rise. And then we have Article 2.1b, which emphasizes on increasing the ability to adapt to climate impacts. And the question which you are asking is related to Article 2.1c, which is the third long-term goal, and it states that making financial flows consistent with a pathway towards low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development. So I can say that though a lot of things have happened before and after this, and we have tracked that Article 2 or 2.1c in Paris Agreement in 2015. Uh, After this Article 2.151c, climate finance took off beyond government international agencies and occupied a key investment variable in the investment community. So, according to me, this is itself one of the exceptional steps but however, the climate finance, especially for the developing countries, still lags behind if we compare with the developed countries. So another observation is, if you see in COP26 in Glasgow, what happened was Net Zero Banking Alliance was launched. Okay, and this is another potential exceptional event that comes to my mind. So NZBA, Net Zero Banking Alliance, it brings together over 90 banks with a collective US dollar 66 trillion in assets, and this representing 43% of the banking assets worldwide to support this rapid transformation of the global economy. Banks in alliance, they have committed to use robust, ambitious, and science-based targets to decarbonize their lending and investment portfolio. And if this thing materializes as promised, and this would be another game changer. This could be a game changer for the entire world. And it was also said at the conference that, and I quote, that right here is where private finance draws the line. We now have the essential plumbing in place to move climate change from the fringes to the forefront of finance so that every financial decision takes climate change into account. And so this was the answer to the first part of the question. And as you have asked about recommendations, in my personal opinion, all the three stakeholders to this game, all the three stakeholders, the government, the investors, and the public, in fact, you and me, everyone have a specific role to make financial flows consistent with low emission and climate resilient pathways. A lot of studies have done, and they have provided various tools that the government can employ to shift financing. Okay, for instance, financial policies and regulations can be used to influence the behavior through force of law. Information instruments can be used by the government to raise awareness among people about climate risk and opportunities. So these are some of the steps that government can take. Secondly, coming to the investors, in the recent newsletter written by BlackRock CEO, so BlackRock, as you know, it is the world largest private investors. He specifically made the statement that the next 1,000 unicorns won't be search engines, it won't be social media companies. They will be sustainable, scalable innovators, startups that would help the world to decarbonize and make the energy transition affordable for all consumers. So our question to these companies is, what are you doing to disrupt your business? How are you preparing for and participating in the net zero transition? As your industry gets transformed by the energy transition, will you go by the way of Dodo? Dodo is an extinct bird, or will you be a phoenix? So while these statements are encouraging, and investors like BlackRock has announced that sustainability will be one of the factors for all investment decisions. While you look at the actual investment made by these large investors are still dominated by non-sustainable investment. You can go through a large number of data sets available in various reports. You can go through all these reports, and it is clear that still a majority of the investment is on non-sustainable things. So it is critical for institutional investors to really pump majority of their capital to sustainability linked investment, and this requires huge capacity building within these institutions for assessing ESG. And also, the retail investors like you and me, we also need to shift our preferences towards sustainably linked financial products such as green funds, etc. And apart from this, uh, and the national and international institutions should work properly towards collecting the granular investment data, climate performance data, and they should further develop the method to measure the climate alignment. They should develop the method to explore the economic benefits of climate aligned investment and financing. And they should they should try to institutionalize consistency analysis at country level as well as international level. So this would also help in encouraging these kind of investments if we have proper data. So ultimately, this will succeed only when it becomes a people's movement. Thank you, Anurag.
Yes, ma'am. It feels quite, nice knowing that even though you might feel like, bigger organizations are not doing as much as they should, that we can take things upon ourselves and make, a drastic change in areas such as the economy and climate finance that people were not previously familiar with. But like you mentioned earlier, that, developing nations have not performed as well as developed nations in this area currently. And in that regard, based on the climate summit that did take place in Copenhagen, many developed countries had made a promise to channel around $100 million to less developed nations by 2020 for this particular task itself. But that promise fell short. Is there a particular reason that this happened?
Uh, yes, Anaka. So, as we all know, at United Nations Climate Summit in Copenhagen, uh, rich nations made a significant pledge, and they promised to channel US dollar 100 billion a year to less wealthy nations by 2020. But most nations, as you probably already know, are falling significantly short of these targets even until now. And although rich nations have collectively agreed to the dollar 100 billion goal, they made no formal deal on what each should pay. So I think this was one of the major reason of this. So there is no agreed definition. There is no agreed common definition on what each should pay and what is the fair share of each developed countries. And so what happened was instead countries announced the pledge in the hope that others will do it. So multiple analysis has been done in this regard, and I will specifically um, explain, explain things from. There is a WRI report which has reckoned that US should contribute 40 to 47% of dollar of 100 billion, but its average annual contribution from 2016 to 2018 was only around dollar 7.6 billion. So you can see the gap of what the fair share should be and what they are actually contributing. And similarly, in the same study, it was found that Australia, Canada, Greece also fell far short of what they should have contributed. Yeah, so another interesting finding of this study was that Japan and France have somehow transferred more than their fair share, but most of their funding came in the form of repayable loans and not grants. So this is also debatable to some extent. And another reason which I think is important is, so many of, if you see the targets announced in the Paris Agreement, many of the developed countries are not even meeting their announced national targets for Paris Agreement. So why they would bother about developing countries national targets, what they have announced? So there was no formal deal. There is less political incentive internationally also as well as locally also there was less political incentives because local people they were thinking that local people are not going to vote you for these kind of investments which you are making abroad. So the political incentives for the local leaders to pay for decarbonization efforts abroad was very less. However, this is fired back, and now this has put the credibility of the developed nation under serious questions. So, in my personal opinion, the developed countries, I think they don't have the moral ground to advise developing countries like India. And India is one of the few countries who have a good track record of meeting climate obligations to the UN, and they don't have any moral ground to advise us on such things. And because their credibility of the developed nations are under serious questions now because they were not able to fulfill what they pledged. So now I think they would take it more seriously, and maybe in future some positive results can be found.
Yes, ma'am, I do agree. I think it has been established through this session and the sessions that we've taken before that the developing nations and developed nations have to work together and ensure that their finances go along with, the economic aspect of the decisions of their finances to make sure our, temperatures don't go beyond what is, what is given and what is limited. Like according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it said an estimate of around $1.6 trillion to around $3.8 trillion is required annually to avoid warming exceeding 1.5 degrees Celsius. But actions such as fossil fuel subsidization still continue to happen. The thing is, not a lot of people know what the harms of this particular action is, and if this particular subsidy that still exists, is it only truly beneficial to the richer developed, richer, more developed countries? What are your opinions about this, ma'am?
Yes, Anaga, I don't think so. It is beneficial to anyone. So let me explain this. There's a report published by IISD. IISD is an international institute for sustainable development, and it has estimated that G20 group of countries alone gave an average $584 billion per year between 2017 and 19 to support fossil fuels. And an interesting finding of this study was the four biggest provider of such fossil fuel supports were China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and India as well. Similarly, another study by IRENA, it tracked some $634 billion in energy sector subsidies in 2020, and it was found that around 70% went to fossil fuels and only 20% went to renewable power generation, 6% went to biofuels, and only 3% to nuclear. So, this clearly indicates an imbalance of subsidy between fossil fuels and clean energy. So, because of these fossil fuel subsidy, what is happening is it is that it is artificially keeping fossil fuels cheaper than renewables in some applications or in some reasons you can say. And what is happening is it is extending the viability of fossil fuel longer than it should have been. And apart from this, it is also limiting the fiscal space for pumping in critical climate capital for innovations, manufacturing, and project development of clean technologies. And ultimately, it is leading to the less optimal use of taxpayer money into an industry whose financial returns are diminishing. So, I don't think so. Fossil fuel subsidies are beneficial to anybody because it is ultimately harming the renewable energy sector of developed nation as well. So, thank you, Anuka.
Understood, ma'am. That was an aspect of it that I hadn't taken into account. Now, because the economic effects that we have seen over the past 2 years, especially with the pandemic, it has shown that, a lot of countries are putting an emphasis on spending in areas such as public health, with developed nations spending trillions and trillions of dollars only last year to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. But the thing is, it made the mid to long term prospects of climate finance very uncertain. Are there any insights that you can provide, us for this particular regard? And is there any way that we can overcome this?
Yes, Ananga, I can say that yes, it is true that public health is a key focus area for the last 2 years. But I don't think so that climate finance is competing with health investment. As we have discussed in the previous section also, I think climate finance is competing with the fossil fuel investment even today, because the fossil fuel investment outstrips the renewable energy investments. And whenever in the past, whenever a crisis has happened, for instance, if you talk about 2008 financial crisis, so after every crisis, uh, what government do is to come up with various stimulus program to boost the economy across different timelines, and we can see that similar rollout of stimulus programs are in process today. And we are as we are coming out of pandemic, governments are announcing various stimulus programs. to overcome the unemployment and other adverse effects of the pandemic. And most stimulus programs has huge non-health components to create jobs post pandemic. Okay, so for instance, if you talk about India, in India government has come up with PLI schemes in India. Similarly, in European Union, they come up with green deals, and in USA, infrastructure acts. So you can see, as happened in the past, that after every crisis, the government comes up with various stimulus program, and today also it is coming up with various stimulus programs, and it has huge non-health component. So I cannot say that okay, that climate finance is competing with health investment. So one of the example I want to give is of China. So in 2008, China pumped, like after this financial crisis, China pumped in huge amount of stimulus into green technologies such as electric vehicles, solar panels, raw materials, supply chain for green technologies. And this stimulus played a key role in creating initial at scale demand for these new technologies. And today, China is dominating these areas, and it is reaping huge economic dividends for green investment. So, my opinion is climate finance, if done at a scale and if done in a right way, can reap rich economic dividends. It has huge multiplier effect, and we are actually seeing it now in very high subscription to green bonds. So I would say that fossil, like not clean investment, but fossil fuel investment have much more uncertainty of mid to long term dividends than clean investments. So this was my view on this. Thank you, Anika.
Thank you so much for answering all of my questions, ma'am. Let me just quickly check if there are any questions in the live box. Um, I should mention, I'm quite sure our audiences are enjoying the session as much as I am, because this is an extremely insightful session. But from what I can tell, there are no questions in the chat box currently. But thank you so much, Dr. Sweety, for being with us, here today. I would also like to thank everyone who decided to join our live session today. It was an extremely insightful session, and I learned quite a lot about a topic that I wasn't quite familiar with earlier as well. So thank you so much for that, ma'am. Um,
Thank you
other
so
than
much,
that,
Ms. Anika.
we will be back at the same time next week. So if you don't want to miss out on any updates or future conversations, do follow our social media pages and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Once again, thank you so much and see you next week at the Circular Chat. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much.